Hello music lovers, and welcome to episode 3 of the Woodshed. I got a lot of great comments, a lot of good feedback about things you wanted me to discuss, one of which was tone. So tone is the thing where we can talk about it for many episodes to come and all the different ways to get good tone, or at least in my opinion, what I like. Today though, let's be very specific. I want to talk about having one guitar and a Fractal. I'm using a Fractal Axe-fx 3, right? You can use, we're talking about Axe-8, we're talking about Axe-fx 2. A lot of the stuff that I want to talk about is just getting a good fundamental tone out of your Axe-fx. First off, here's my guitar. It's the prototype to my Sir Signature series. This one is the humbucker and trim. This is actually the prototype. This was the first 24 fret Sir Telly ever built, and it wasn't to get a paycheck. This was something that I wanted. I didn't like the way the heel joint felt on a regular Telecaster or Telecaster style guitar, and it had nothing to do, very little to do with playing high E, more about playing an F sharp, G, E, and not having anything touch the back of my hand. Here's the back of the guitar. It's a variation of the heel joint from the Modern. So let's take a listen at the core tone of the guitar. There's the neck pickup. Here's just the neck coil. A little more Hendrixy. And then here's the two humbuckers together. Here's the two inside coils. It's a very stratty kind of sound. And here's the bridge humbucker. And then series parallel. So there's our core fundamental tone, right? All right, so now let's start building the tone. Let's just dive in. I'm using the software editor, and let's start with this is the tone that I used at the top of the show. This is a 50 watt plexi. It's jumped. The cabinet is G1265 412 on one side and a 412 Classic Lead 80 on the other. 412 Classic Lead 80 is a great cabinet. 65s are what I use in my real cabinets. The Sir cabinet has it. The diesel 412s that I use and I love. I'm a big fan. I also use the Eminence Wheelhouse. I like a lot of headroom in speakers, so this kind of emulates that sound. All right, so let's hear it before I show you one of my tricks. I'm going to readjust the setting here. And this is before, this is just with the 50 watt plexi and the two cabinets. So one of the things that's happening is the low end can get kind of dumpy. It's nice, it sounds good on studio monitors, maybe it sounds good in headphones, but you get live and your low end's out of control. Typically you reach for the bass knob. I don't do that. I go to my cab block here, and within that cab block, you see low cut. I roll that up. Let's roll it up to about 100 on each cabinet and hit the same thing. Now that low end's not in the way, but your fundamental tone hasn't changed. Everything still sounds like the same rig we were playing through. The low end's just not like obtrusive in your face everywhere. I don't like that. I don't like it when I'm standing on a stage and there's just low end and the subs rolling around. It makes it difficult and I just don't like it. So this is how I address low end. Okay, now let's take a listen at this tone. Sounds pretty good on my studio monitors, but it could be maybe a little ice picky to some folks. So that could be a little abrasive. I use a parametric EQ right after the cabinet block. Here, let's turn it on again. Here's the same kind of licks. So I'm using that on its own block for a reason, right? The reason is that I can have the ability to switch. If the room is really dark, I can turn it off, right? We get back to this thing. If the room is really bright and the PA is really bright and it's killing me, and I love having that flexibility on its own foot switch. That way I'm not having to go back to the rack or reach down and twist through some things. So that's how I like to control my top end within the Fractal. All right, so now let's jump over to the one of the things I love to do, and that's use a compressor block to hit the front end of the amp. I'm gonna turn the parametric EQ off. This is just the amp and cabinet again. Let's hear the tone without the compressor block. Now I'm gonna turn the compressor on. It's just a lot bigger. There's a lot more of it. I'm not using a compressor to squeeze the crap out of my tone at all. I'm using it more as a boost. I've got a threshold, kind of straight up and down. And then over on the level side, I'm hitting it at anywhere between 9 decibels and 12 decibels. And I just think it makes notes sound real big. And again, here it is with the parametric EQ on. So there's both my light and dark tones, Let's jump into the reverb side of things. Reverb is at the very end for me. I've got it set really low. So let's take a listen to what my reverb sounds like. That's just a plate reverb set at around 7%, right? The reason I do that is if I'm on in-ears or if the rooms, maybe we're playing outside, there's a festival, something like that you get into, and you just feel like your tone is super, super dry. Just a little bit of plate reverb can go a long way. Obviously, you can get into reverbs and use them to taste. Like I know a guy like maybe Mateus Asado would use more of a medium hall or a dark hall. He loves a lot of verb, they're really dark. But in general, for a fundamental tone, I like a simple plate reverb set at around 7% with like a 2-second decay. It's just nice and it feels good under the fingers. And then here it is with the parametric EQ, so you can hear how it sounds dark. Really nice. So let's move on to the delay block. With delay, I'm using a dual delay. I'm using one side at 500 milliseconds and the other side at 375 milliseconds. I've got the feedback set appropriately to where on the longer delay, the 500, it's at 15%-ish. And on the shorter one, the 375, it's at 25%. So let's just hear what that sounds like. The mix is around 10%. What I like is to hear the left and the right, and on the third one, they kind of line up. And I love that tone. I love that. It's nice for fast playing, and it doesn't get in the way. It's great for ballads. And yet again, it's never in the way. So let's jump to the last block we're going to discuss, which is the drive block. On the drive block, I'm going to turn the compressor block off. On the drive block, I'm shelving the low end a little bit more. Let's hear it without the drive. Turning the drive on. What I've done is I've taken the low cut in the tone section. You have basic, then tone. In tone, low cut, if you roll it all the way back to the left, it'll get really loose. Here, let's just hear what that sounds like. It's way too much low end. So what I do to get notes to pop out is I roll that clockwise till about 230 or 3. And it stays out of the way when I'm playing really fast passages. Every note nice and clean. So let's review real quick on what we've done. What we're going to talk about is getting a great core fundamental tone. I even, just like to go through my guitars on the direct and see what they sound like direct in. From there, pick an amp and cab that you just like the fundamental tone of. With the EQ not being all over the place, it just sounds good to your ears and something that you like. Now let's talk into some of my tips and tricks, right? So trick number 1, what was it? Being in the low end of the cabinet block, controlling the low end of your sound there and not going to the bass knob on the amp, right? Going into the cabinet block, taking a look at low cut, rolling that clockwise, okay? That'll shelve a lot of that low end without changing a lot of your fundamental tone, okay? Now let's talk about the same thing with the top end. Let's say your sound is good at home, you get on the gig and it just pierces you. Go to the parametric EQ, go all the way to the right to the frequency that's around, 4,000 hertz, 4K or whatever, and switch that to blocking, okay? You've got peaking, you got shelving, etc. Jump that over to blocking and it'll take that top end down. That way, if you're on a really bright room or a really bright PA, that you got control of it, and also make sure that it's in its own block and you're not using that EQ within something else. That way you can turn it on and off for when you play in dark rooms, okay? Let's talk about the compressor one more time. Using that to punch the front end of the amp. It's like adding a little bit of gain. We're using about 10 decibels or so. We're not using the threshold to squeeze the tone, right? It's just giving that amp and those notes a bit more punch. With the drive block, right, I don't have the drive very high at all. The drive is almost off, and the level is turned up really loud. The level's all the way like 3 o'clock. And within that, I listen to the tone and look for the low end. Again, the trick, not reaching for the bass knob on the treble or on the drive block. You're not trying to get the bass out of the drive block. You go into the shelving of the low end and let it grab the frequency that you want. Again, where I found that was going not in basic, but in tone. And you'll see low cut. And then roll that clockwise until the flubby, dumpy low end goes away. And that's just kind of the way that I start out. If I have any noise, I go to the input block on the far left and look for the threshold and roll it up clockwise. Okay, that's gonna eliminate any idle hum that I have. Let's roll that all the way out. I'll just let you hear it on the computer speakers without using the direct tone. Here it is. Right, that's a lot. So, but that's with the compressor and the drive on. Okay. Now what I do is with both of those on, I just start rolling that away. I turn that up to where it starts going away. And it looks like it starts grabbing it around -50. That's noonish, and then it doesn't affect the rest of my tone. All right, that's it for episode 3 of the Woodshed. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for letting me talk about tone, talk about how I use the Fractal. In future episodes, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite signal chains, which is using all my tube amps into an aux. The aux box is killer. We're going to dig into that, how I use pedals, how I use an analog signal chain. That will be coming up in a future episode. Please let me know in the comments what kind of content you want to see. Do you want to see specifically more lesson stuff? Do you want me to talk more about tone? Is there something going on in the guitar community that you'd like to talk about with me? I'm even tossing around the ideas of doing some live streams on YouTube. I have some very special guests that are going to be joining me throughout the iteration of the show. And again, thanks so much for making me feel welcome on YouTube and allowing me to self-indulge my guitar nerd side, and for commenting and giving good feedback. I really appreciate all you guys. Until next time,